But unfortunately, it took a tragedy. It took the murder of Ed. In October 30th, 2000, he was assassinated. He was assassinated while making an undercover drug buy. He had brought drugs from this individual, this mid-level cocaine dealer, multiple times before. We discussed this case, even though I had already retired. We continued to talk about his cases. And he discussed this case with me, and we thought, oh, well, it's just another routine buy. And this was the last time he was going to buy drugs from this guy in the Washington, D.C. area. He was working on a task force with the FBI. But this time, because of how lucrative this illicit trade is, this time, this drug dealer wanted to keep the money and the drugs. So he assassinated him, and he fled to New York City, even though there was a takedown team close by. And he had a wife, 3 kids. But what was significant about this moment for me, it was obviously a life-changing event for me, was that I started to think about all the other cops that I knew who were killed by drug dealers because of the money that can be made in this business. You know, it started with Marty Ward. When I worked undercover, there was another undercover agent by the name of Marty Ward in Baltimore City who was assassinated. You know, then it was Billy Martin, who was running a drug dealer in Baltimore City as we go into the late 80s. And then, you know, in the 2000s, there was, in Baltimore City, there was Michael Powdery and Devon Gavin, 2 Baltimore City police officers. Now, I'm just talking about Baltimore City. I haven't even begun to venture out of Baltimore City when we're talking about these homicides of police. But you see, it's not just about cops dying. That got my attention. But what about the innocent civilians? What about the kids that are caught in running gun battles and drive-by shootings? So what about the innocent? Now, I know you've seen this. If you've traveled in any urban area, you've seen these memorials for the lives that have been lost as a result of the violence that is perpetuated because of our drug war, the illicit trade. They're everywhere. You know, so no city, no community is safe in this environment. I want to speak to about one family in particular, and this is the Dawson family. Not too long, just a couple years after Ed was assassinated, the entire family of 7 was wiped out in one night in Baltimore City because one local drug dealer opened up shop on that corner. That's their home. He wanted to do business right out in front of their home, and the mother and was in the upper left. Wanted to protect her kids from the violence and from being indoctrinated, recruited into that business. So she started working with the police. He didn't like it, so he broke into her home one morning and he set her home on fire. All 7, including the father who's not pictured here, perished in that fire. This isn't just unique to Baltimore. It's not just unique to Maryland. It's not just unique to the United States. What about Mexico, your 3 neighbors to the southwest? In the past 4 decades, over 40,000 homicides at the hands of the cartel. It's the violence that got me to this place. In just 2 years after Ed's murder, while conducting research, I stumbled across a brand new website. And that's it. It's Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And I signed on immediately. I finally found others who were thinking like me and beginning to question these policies. But there was one distinct difference. They knew much more than I did. They had been in this a little longer than I did. And who were they? They were judges, they were cops, they were prosecutors, corrections officials. You heard Judge Jim Gray mention. He's one of our wonderful speakers. And I began to talk and work with folks like him. And all of these guys and ladies who had spent decades on the front lines of the war on drugs have all come together to end drug prohibition. Now, as I get a little bit further, you may disagree with some of what I have to say, but you can't tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. The communicated initial, and I say communicated initial goals for launching the war on drugs was to reduce crime, disease, death, and addiction. Say communicated, because if you want to know the truth about it, and I'm sure you're going to hear the truth about it over the next couple of days, you need to read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. Mass incarceration, major color crimes. I'll leave that for you to read. But in order to accomplish these stated goals, we believe that you must end prohibition in order to do it. This is some of what they taught me. And I'm learning more about the unintended harms of failed drug policy every day. First, they taught me to realize what I had already known, but what I had closed my eyes to see. Things like, it's impossible to have a drug-free society. Totally impossible. Drugs have been with us since we first discovered that if we chewed on a particular plant, we get a little loose. And that goes back thousands upon thousands of years. Another is that more drugs come into our country every single day. More. And here's an example of that. In the late 70s, early 80s, when I started working in the public, if I seized an ounce of heroin or a kilo, 2.2 pounds of cocaine, I had a press conference, and I stood a good chance at getting promoted. And when I would seize a couple pounds of cocaine or heroin, you know what, they would feel it in the streets. The prices would go up a little bit, you know, and you would hear the buzz, because we stopped the drugs from getting to the street. They had to replace that. But today, a newsworthy seizure of drugs is a container load. It's tons of cocaine. It's tons of heroin. It's tons, bales of marijuana. And you know what? When we make such a seizure, the streets don't miss a beat. They factor that in when the drugs come into the country. They know they're going to lose a certain amount. So they ship it. We can't keep drugs out of this country. Shoot, we can't even keep them out of our prisons. So how are you going to keep them out of your neighborhoods? We've got to learn how to live with drugs and mitigate the harms of use and abuse. So, they also taught me that there is extreme violence associated, to recognize that there is extreme violence associated with the illicit drug trade, as I just spoke to. And they taught me that this is all nothing new. You see, we had been here once before in the 1920s in this country with alcohol prohibition. Al Capone, Chicago, Bugsy Siegel, St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and all that violence surrounding prohibition, not the fact that people were drinking, it was the laws that we put in place in prohibition that generated that violence. And it only took my grandparents 13 years to realize it was a bad place to be, and he repealed that. I don't know why we don't see it today. Then he taught me about the prison industrial complex, and I'll just touch on this real quick. The U.S. is 5% of the world's population, yet we house 25% of its prisoners. And I say house because there are no corrective measures for preparing them for re-entry back into society. The land of the free, well, at least Racial disparity is another issue, and once again, read Michelle's book for that. We, law enforcement, whether intentionally or not, police using discriminatory practices. We do. Accept it. In 2008, we imprisoned white males at a rate of 943 for 100,000. White males, 943 for 100,000. And black males at a rate of 4,919 for 100,000. If you incorporate Latinos, meaning all people of color, that's 6,667 for 100,000. Prisons in this country have become a detriment to public safety. They don't enhance public safety. You see, they breed violence. That's where our gangs were born, in prison. Violence that will eventually return to our neighborhoods. Racial profiling set squarely upon the back of drug prohibition. Think about it. And all the laws that we're now trying to pass to prohibit, to prevent racial profiling. Yes, we had it before drug prohibition, but it is 20 times worse today because of it. They taught me the difference between the two problems. The drug use and abuse problem that I mentioned before that we have and that we will have till the end. But then on the other side, we created the drug prohibition problem. And with that came all of the violence and all the police corruption and all the expense and all those unintended harms, some of which I'm speaking about today. We created that. And if we created that, we can make it go away. If we so choose. In closing, the best way for me to communicate the far-reaching effects of the drug war is to describe to you what an end to drug prohibition would look like. Here we go. A significant reduction in crime. I know for a fact, I've been there, and I know why the majority of our violent crime in our neighborhoods exists. A significant reduction in crime, mainly violent crime, prohibition murders, not drug use murders, drug prohibition murders. Let's look at Mexico. A significant reduction in disease, such as AIDS and HIV. Take a look at Portugal, who 10 years ago moved into an area of decriminalization for possession of small amounts of drugs, for personal use, all drugs. And as a result, as it relates to new cases of AIDS, a 71% reduction for intervention. 71% reduction. A significant reduction in addiction. Again, look at Portugal. They experienced a 25%, over this period of time, 25% drug use decrease for school-age children, 13 to 15 years of age, and a 22% decrease for those 16 to 19 years of age. You know, over the past couple of decades in this country, we cut tobacco consumption in half with effective education and a cultural shift. I know you guys don't get much snow down here, but up in Maryland, if you want to smoke a cigarette in the wintertime, you got to go out and stand in the snow. People quit due to social pressures. And in doing that, we sent no one to prison. No one. We would experience a significant reduction in overdose deaths. In 1979, in this country, we had 28 deaths per 100,000 users. 2000, the number was 141 deaths per 100,000.